Tonight on Reporting Scotland, a review into how Holyrood deals with complaints of harassment. It follows allegations of sexual misconduct at the Scottish Parliament. A pathologist who carried out the post-mortem on a 14-month-old toddler tells a High Court trial she could not be certain what caused the child's heart to stop. A woman whose gambling-addicted partner killed himself welcomes a UK government review of fixed odds betting terminals.
It's not going to bring Lee back. It's not going to bring back all the people that I've spoken to that have lost loved ones. They're not going to come back, but it will go some way to protecting other people.
Also in the programme, Arise, Sir Billy Connolly, Glasgow's Bigian, receives his knighthood from Prince William.
And join me live from Celtic Park ahead of another huge Champions League night. Bayern Munich are the visitors.
Good evening. Scotland's political leaders have backed moves to discover whether there is a suppressed problem of sexual harassment at Holyrood. The First Minister told BBC Scotland that the country could be approaching a watershed moment in tackling such abuse. This from our political editor, Brian Taylor.
Arriving for this afternoon's talks at Holyrood, the First Minister said it was crucial to look behind the symptoms to the core question.
The root cause here is the behaviour of some men who believe they can act with women with impunity, abuse positions of power and indulge in behaviour that is unacceptable anywhere that it occurs.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
In Parliament, that message was deliberately and consciously echoed by her deputy, the most senior male Cabinet Secretary.
The Government wants to make clear that it is the conduct and behaviour of men that needs to change if we are to end the sexual harassment and abuse of women.
At the talks themselves, it was unanimously agreed to continue with zero tolerance of any sexual harassment. The parties agreed to review their procedures, and the presiding officer explained that Parliament as a whole would do the same. He announced plans for an anonymous survey inside Holyrood to allow those with private worries to come forward.
I think we are very conscious that the number of cases we are aware of is very low indeed. And we're also very confident that we've got robust procedures in place. But the difficulty, of course, is that if this is a hidden problem, if this is a suppressed problem, then we need to take further action to make sure that everyone feels comfortable, particularly women feel comfortable coming forward and being confident that they will be believed, will be listened to, and they'll be given proper advice.
In terms of a widespread problem of harassment, that is not something that we've seen evidence of, but we've got to ensure that anybody that has had an issue does feel that they're able to come forward and able to report it so that we can know about it and then we're able to act.
Tonight, the First Minister said there was a chance to shine a light on the corridors of power.
This could be a real watershed moment where we see deep-rooted cultural change. I mean, I've been a woman in politics for 30 years. I know that in politics, and the same will be true in other walks of life, that this is the kind of behaviour women have felt that they just have to put up with. And this is a moment, I think, where we can say, no, we don't just have to put up with this.
And Nicola Sturgeon said that Holyrood could lead the way across Scotland.
Well, let's speak to Brian. Brian, as we heard there, no one is suggesting that the problem of harassment is endemic at Holyrood. So what is this review hoping to achieve?
Jackie, it's pour encourager les autres, to encourage the others, to encourage women and men to come forward if they believe they have been victims, to encourage those, to oblige those, to force those who are perhaps inflicting themselves upon others around Parliament to stop their behaviour, and to encourage all of us to call out such behaviour, to put a stop to it, to change the culture, as you heard there from the First Minister and from others. The parties here at Holyrood disagree. They disagree sharply about many things, but they agree upon one thing, and they made that agreement plain today in their unanimous declaration. They believe that sexual harassment, particularly when it is driven by an abuse of power, is repugnant.
Brian, thank you. The trial of a mother accused of murdering her toddler has heard it wasn't possible to determine what caused the girl's heart to stop beating from the post-mortem results. Giving evidence, the pathologist told the court she had looked at a number of scenarios but couldn't determine which one was more likely. Aileen Clark reports.
Dr Don Penman is the paediatric pathologist who conducted the post-mortem on 14-month-old Inaya Ahmed. She told the court that the toddler looked healthy and had no broken bones, and that the child had died because when her heart stopped beating, the absence of oxygen to the brain had irreversibly damaged it. She said what caused the toddler's heart to stop beating was less certain. Dr. Penman said from the post-mortem findings she could not determine whether the little girl choked on food or if she was smothered by a pillow or if Anaya's heart stopped for another reason. She says it is uncertain and ultimately not possible to determine if the most likely scenario was homicidal, accidental or due to natural diseases. Dr. Penman said there are children of Anaya's age who die and pathologists don't find a definitive cause of death. Later, under cross-examination by the Defence QC, Ian Duguid, it was put to Dr. Penman that the windpipe of a child of Anaya's age is only around half a centimetre or a fifth of an inch wide, so an object as small as that could cause choking, and that it would be difficult to spot something that small if it was coughed up after the child fell unconscious. Dr. Penman said that she wouldn't expect an unconscious child to cough, but it was a possibility and she had not discounted that. Sadia Ahmed denies murdering her 14-month-old daughter Anaya at the family home in Glasgow last year. Aileen Clark, reporting Scotland at the High Court in Glasgow.
New rules have come into force designed to tackle people trafficking and modern slavery here. The orders allow the courts to place restrictions on anyone suspected of trafficking or exploitation and can mean curbs on their movements and ultimately a jail sentence. Craig Anderson can tell us more.
9 years ago, Abul Azad was persuaded to spend thousands of pounds to come to the UK to work from Bangladesh. The traffickers promised him a visa and a well-paid job as a chef, but the reality was very different. He found himself virtually enslaved in a grubby hotel, working round the clock with promises of wages which never came. If he left without the money, he'd have no way to pay off his debts, and was even threatened that if he returned home, his kidney would be removed to sell. He was trapped.
They just used us like a, that you already told me this, that we are working just like on call, 24 hours like this, anytime, 24 hours. We cannot sleep also, the properly,
Eventually, the law caught up with Abul's tormentors and one was jailed here for 3 years. The Scottish Government's now making it easier to crack down on the traffickers.
This can restrict their movement so they can't leave the country, it can restrict what they can do online, and also it can restrict who they can actually engage with as well. And the purpose behind this is to try and make sure that our prosecutors have as many powers as possible to prevent human trafficking from taking place, and the new orders that are introduced today will help to support them in being able to do that.
It can be difficult in such cases to secure a criminal conviction. Victims might be too frightened to give evidence, for example. The new risk of trafficking and exploitation orders use the civil law, where the standard of evidence needed is much lower.
The standard of proof is lower, it's the civil standard of proof. The evidential kind of protections are not the same, and you are in effect placing upon an individual quite significant constraints in a context where they've not been actually convicted of a criminal offence.
People like Abul welcome the new orders but say the government should be doing more to help the victims. After all he's been through, the chef won't know till next March whether he'll be allowed to stay here or deported back to Bangladesh.
They just used the victim to take evidence from the court and they just left the victim. They should punish more, not only this 2 years, 3 years victim is punishment and sentence is not enough, They just destroyed the victim lives.
Craig Anderson, reporting Scotland.
The man who led the No campaign against Scottish independence has said there should be a rethink on the powers at Holyrood to let it take some control over immigration. Lord Darling, the former Labour Chancellor, was appearing before a House of Lords committee. But our business and economy editor Douglas Fraser joins me. So why is Lord Darling making this case now?
Well, this is all about Brexit. He was appearing in front of a House of Lords committee on Europe, asked about relations specifically between Holyrood and Westminster. He said, first of all, that he thinks the constitutional question was settled with the 2014 Scottish referendum. But he raised two distinctive issues about Brexit for Scotland. One was the finance sector, with a lot of jobs in Edinburgh and Glasgow. The other was this one of immigration. It's now controlled from Westminster. The SNP government and Lord Darling are now in agreement that there's a distinctive Scottish problem of an ageing population, of demographic change. In other words, the country needs more immigrants. The economy does anyway. Now, he said there's no easy answers to devolving powers over immigration, but it's something that the UK government ought to take a look at.
It is fraught with difficulty as long as you don't have a border. And if you allow someone to come and work in Edinburgh or Glasgow, how can you be sure that's where they continue to work? But other countries seem to have a go at it. And I do think it's something that needs to be looked at, although I wouldn't underestimate, firstly, the practical problems of doing it, and also the fact that the whole issue of immigration is as difficult and charged an issue north of the border as it is south.
And Douglas, the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, he was also addressing the committee and the Cabinet in Downing Street. What's he been saying?
Well, in front of the committee, he was not answering a lot of the questions that the Lords were putting to him about the negotiations, but he did concede that the financial divorce deal is more likely to favour the other 27 members of the European Union. He sees no legal obligation to pay, it's only political pressure, and he doesn't want to explain to the British public the need for this extra bill until the deal is done. Talks pick up again next week at a more intensified pace, we're told. And while he doesn't think that there will be no deal, he's now talking about a basic deal, one that doesn't cover customs and trade. Now, earlier in the day, as you were saying, David Davis was briefing the Cabinet in Downing Street about preparations for Brexit. Some big numbers, 300 work programmes that they're trying to get through to prepare Britain for this change. They've already hired 3,000 more civil servants. Next year, 5,000 more in revenue and customs. The preparation bill for Brexit, so far, £500 million.
Wow, Douglas, thank you very much. The former Aberdeen Labour MP Frank Doran has died at the age of 68. First elected in 1987, Mr Doran sat in 3 different Westminster seats in the city before retiring from the Commons in 2015. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown describes Mr Doran as a great friend, trade unionist and colleague. 2 men from Aberdeenshire who killed a family's 2 pet geckos have been jailed. Daniel Innes and Jordan McIsaac put one of the lizards in a kitchen blender and filmed it. At Banff Sheriff Court, Innes was sentenced to 36 weeks and McIsaac 33 weeks. They were disqualified indefinitely from keeping animals. A man who murdered his brother by setting him on fire has had his bid to appeal his sentence refused. Blair Logan was given a life sentence with a minimum jail term of 20 years for murdering his brother Cameron at their parents' home on New Year's Day. The 27-year-old also admitted attempting to murder Cameron's girlfriend, Rebecca Williams, in the fire in Mulgai. Now, arise Sir Billy Connolly. The Scots actor and comedian has been given a knighthood, just a few weeks short of his 75th birthday. Our arts correspondent Pauline McLean reports.
Billy Connolly's no stranger to royal performances, but this one was a little more formal than most, even if he did make the Duke of Cambridge laugh, and he's still getting used to the title.
I feel like Sir William Connolly. Kind of strange. Disappointed there weren't earrings to match.
It's been quite a year for honours, from an honorary doctorate at the University of Strathclyde.
Jesus, that's amazing. I've never seen myself that size before.
To 3 larger-than-life portraits in the city where he grew up.
Very moving.
Parkinson's disease may have slowed him down, but this honour, only weeks before his 75th birthday, has given him a much-needed boost.
And of course, you don't see yourself as an old man, which is what I am. Because I always see myself as a hairy rebel. A hairy, rebellious knight.
A reluctant rather than a rebellious knight stepped out of Buckingham Palace and into the spotlight today, surrounded by his family. He says he's sad his parents and sister weren't around to see it, but glad his many fans are.
I'm kind of stunned by it, I'm kind of numb, but it means a great deal to the people around me, you know, and the fans and everything. I was at the football last week in Scotland and I was amazed at the reception I got from the other supporters. it seems to mean a great deal to them, which is lovely.
Pauline McLean reporting, Scotland.
It's 17 minutes to 7. A reminder now of tonight's top story. The Scottish Government is to review how it deals with complaints of harassment following allegations of sexual misconduct at Holyrood. And still to come, we will be looking at Celtic's Champions League hopes as they take on Bayern Munich tonight. A woman whose partner took his own life after using fixed odds betting terminals is welcoming a UK government review of the machines. Lee Murphy from Aberdeenshire accrued thousands of pounds worth of debt. His partner Wendy has been campaigning against the terminals ever since. Katrina Renton reports.
Wendy Bendel from Inverurie has been campaigning for change. She investigated for Panorama after her partner Lee Murphy took his own life. He had racked up gambling debts of £30,000. He was just 36.
Lee's life changed greatly, I guess. A lot of secrecy, debt. Secrecy and debt I think would be the main change in behaviour, change in attitude, and the whole time trying to put a brave face on and pretend nothing was happening to the outside world, and sadly he was trying to deal with this himself.
At fixed odds betting terminals, it's the relatively high chance of a win that helps make the machines so addictive.
No more bets, please.
People can bet up to £100 every 20 seconds. The Gambling Commission is looking at lowering the maximum bet that can be placed to somewhere between £50 and £2.
I'd rather that the machines weren't on the high street. I'd rather bookmakers weren't on the high street, but that's not going to happen. The machines either need to be removed or to drastically reduce the stake down to £2. £2 is the figure that we're all looking at.
In this street in Glasgow, we counted 5 betting shops in less than half a mile. And it's this concentration of shops that's causing concern for campaigners that access to these fixed odds betting terminals is all too easy, often in the places where people can afford them least. The industry believes if the stakes are lowered, shops will close.
And the real worry is that those customers will simply go elsewhere. They'll gamble online, they'll gamble in pubs where alcohol is served, they'll gamble in casinos and arcades where there are fewer controls and obviously fewer staff. Now our real worry is that in the worst case scenario, up to half of the retail estate in Scotland could close.
Gambling powers remain largely reserved to the UK government. The Scottish government currently has limited powers and is arguing for the full devolution of gambling policy to enable problem gambling to be tackled more effectively. Katrina Renton, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Death rates for cancer are 61% higher in the most deprived parts of Scotland, according to new NHS figures. They also reveal that the number of cancer cases is 27% higher in the poorer parts of the country than the most affluent areas. Lung cancer remains the most common cause of death, accounting for a quarter of fatalities. Universities are being urged to significantly reduce the grades young people from disadvantaged backgrounds need for a place. A report commissioned by the Scottish Funding Council recommends cutting the exam results which are needed for a place in some of the most prestigious courses. The Scottish Government wants a fifth of students to come from the 20% most deprived areas by 2030. Average speed cameras have come into operation on the A90 between Dundee and Stonehaven. The £2 million system tracks vehicles along the 52-mile stretch of road. Similar speed cameras are already in place on the A9 and the A77. The government says there has already been a reduction in the number of deaths and casualties. Police are warning the public not to approach an absconded prisoner from Barlinnie. Walter Bett had been on an external work placement. He was last seen around 8:20 this morning near Crow Road's Wood Golf Course in Glasgow's Muirhead. Celtic hope to prolong their interest in this season's Champions League by beating Bayern Munich at Parkhead this evening. 60,000 fans are already on their way to the match. And as Kerden Idsan reports, both sets of supporters are in confident mood.
That's German for 8-0. Clearly Bayern fancy their chances this evening, as do some Celtic fans.
We're all from Dublin for the game, and I'm just thinking, you know what, why can't we get one of those great Celtic nights?
I think Bayern will win 3-1.
Sinclair 1, Dembele 1, Tor,
and Kimmich 1, and Thiago 1. Good.
So you say Celtic 2, Bayern Munich 2, a 2-all draw?
Yes.
There's little margin for error if Celtic want to stay in the competition. A defeat tonight would almost certainly end any hopes they harbour of making the last 16. The main man, Lewandowski, is one of several top stars missing from Munich. A bright spot for Celtic that the visitors aren't at full strength.
Bayern would take a point. They haven't been, haven't got great form away from home. Under Ancelotti, they lost, 2 of the group games last season, so they are there to be beaten.
In the shadows this Halloween then, what chance of another famous Celtic Park Fright Night? Juventus were one of several sides spooked by the atmosphere in Glasgow. It was scary for Sir Alex Ferguson and Manchester United too when they lost in 2006. But the beating of Barcelona 5 years ago probably caused the biggest shock of them all. A little less frightening perhaps is the home record in recent years. You have to go back to October 2013 when they beat Ajax for the last group stage win here at Celtic Park. How manager Brendan Rodgers would love to change that this evening. Kerry Nidsan reporting, Scotland, Glasgow.
Well, under an hour until kick-off. Let's go now to Chris McLaughlin. Chris, you're at Celtic Park. How do you rate the team's chances?
Well, there's always a chance, Jackie, isn't there? But make no mistake, Bayern Munich are huge favourites this evening. Now, perhaps a man better equipped to answer that question is standing right next to me, the former Celtic striker Scott McDonald. Scott, we have seen the teams. Any surprises, and does Celtic have a chance tonight?
There's always a chance, like you say. Celtic, looking at their team sheet, they'll have to be, hugely encouraged. No Lewandowski, no Muller, obviously forced changes, but also the likes of Hummels and Kimmich as well. But it's not bad when you can call upon people like Martinez, Rodriguez and Vidal to replace them. So it's going to be a big ask. Obviously, the last 9 attempts, Celtic have failed to win at home in the European Champions League. So, it's going to be big. I think if they're going to have any chance, they're going to have to score first.
Now, Brendan Rodgers has been criticised a little bit for being maybe perhaps not pragmatic enough in these big games. Any sign that he'll be more defensive tonight?
No, well, we can't criticise him of that tonight. I think they're going to go with the same sort of team that they played up at Pittodrie against Aberdeen. One change in that, Sinclair comes in for Rogic, but it'll be a 3-4-2-1, and it'll be interesting to see how Bayern cope with that with that extra man in the middle of the park tonight.
And very briefly, Bayern also have a huge league game against Dortmund at the weekend. That could come into play.
Well, we certainly hope so. They've got one eye on that, and obviously they've got a false number 9 tonight, whether it'll be Robin, or Rodriguez. So we'll just have to wait and see. But the goal threat is limited for them.
Scott, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Now, it's a complete sellout. You know the drill. If you haven't got a ticket, it is live on BBC Radio Scotland. Sports Sound, and kick-off is 7:45. Jackie.
Chris, thank you. The face of an 18th century woman who died after she was accused of being a witch has been reconstructed using digital technology. Unlike so many so-called witches who were burned, the remains of Lilias Eadie survived and were buried in the River Forth. Andrew Anderson takes up the story.
As if by magic, the face of a witch appears. Or at least the face of a woman accused of being a witch 300 years ago. This is how forensic artists believe Lilias Eadie would have looked. They had to rely on these photographs of her skull showing her protruding upper jaw and buck teeth. The skull itself had mysteriously disappeared. For the artist, it was an additional challenge.
The approach that I took, which is not something that I would do with a forensic case, but with this case, was to bring in a different skull that was similar. So a skull of the same demographic of a woman in her 60s with an overbite that I could distort to fit the images more closely.
It's not terribly far from the coast today, but of course back in the early...
Archaeologist Douglas Spears shows me where Lilias Eadie was buried on the Fife coast in 1704. Most suspected witches were burned, but Lilias died in prison, tortured and tormented, but before she could repent. This sandstone slab laid on her grave by her accusers.
We have a grave cut into these mud and a very heavy stone that's been placed on top of the grave specifically to stop that witch coming back, climbing out of the grave and coming back to essentially to wreak revenge on her tormentors.
Lilias's face has been reconstructed for a Radio Scotland programme, its producer fascinated by her story.
You see the picture of Lilias, and she's just this nice, kindly lady. Chris at Dundee did a version of Lilias where he made her look like a modern pensioner, and I could quite imagine meeting Lilias on the bus in Fife. So, you know, I was really delighted to see her.
So with the use of science, not witchcraft, we can look again into the eyes of a woman whose story reminds us of dark days in Scotland's past. Andrew Anderson, reporting Scotland.
And this, of course, is Halloween. Have you been out guising like this group? In fact, the ghoul with the glasses looks strangely familiar, Christopher. You had fun?
That was my weekend. We won't show your picture though, Jackie. If you want to see Jackie on a broomstick, just come here Monday morning, 9 a.m. Any Monday morning. So today, fairly cloudy and damp across many parts of the country, quite breezy, and those cloudy, damp conditions continuing through the course of the evening and overnight. But it will be mild, so for those guising, a cloudy, damp evening in store. Drier, though, across parts of the northeast through Aberdeenshire and Angus. But for most of us, cloudy and damp, breezy, as I say, and relatively mild. And as we go overnight, a lot of that rain becomes sort of concentrated towards parts of Argyll, in towards Strathclyde and the southwest, and it will be with us first thing tomorrow morning across this part of the country. So it's a cloudy night, a mild night, and for some turning increasingly wet. And in fact, that rain across parts of the west and southwest could pose some difficult conditions for the morning commute. A lot of surface water and spray on the roads, that sort of thing. A Met Office yellow be aware warning in force. And for most of central southern Scotland, tomorrow will be cloudy and damp. Further north, something a little brighter, albeit with showers. So by mid-afternoon, say around 3 o'clock, still fairly cloudy with that rain fizzling and fading away in the south. And whilst temperatures are 12, 13 Celsius, it will feel cool with that cloud and rain, and the winds fresh from the west. Further north, starting to brighten up through parts of Stirlingshire in towards Clackmannanshire, Fife, Angus, Aberdeenshire, and most of Grampian and Highland actually having some sunshine tomorrow, but with it showers, and those showers merging to longer spells of rain at times, and quite windy from the west, strong at times. Now, the rest of the afternoon into the evening and overnight, and the showers and the rain fizzle and fade away. It's then dry, clear, and quite cold, which sets us up for Thursday being a totally different day. This little bump there, that is a ridge of high pressure, and that will bring fine, dry weather on Thursday. Probably the best day of the week weather-wise. Plenty of sunshine, very little in the way of showers, lighter winds, feeling colder, but certainly much better than the weather we're having today, tonight and tomorrow. That's the forecast. Jackie.
Thank you, Christopher. And that's Reporting Scotland. Whatever you're doing this evening, enjoy it. From everyone on the team across the country, good evening.